Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are so glad to have you join us today for our webinar featuring Alfonso Cambardello, who needs no introduction. Alfonso is a professor of corporate management at Bocconi University. As many of you know, his work focuses on the economics and management of technological innovations and, excuse me, the technology strategies of firms. And more recently, we've seen a lot of his work on how firms and entrepreneurs can make better decisions under uncertainty. He is a department editor at Management Science, a fellow of the Strategic Management Society, and a research fellow of the Center for Economic Policy Research. We are so excited to have Alfonso here today to talk about the micro foundations of a theory-based view of the firm. Alfonso, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandy, and thank you, the Entrepreneurship and Strategy IG and SMS more generally for this invitation. I am really delighted and pleased to talk to all of you and to get feedback on this research program. So what we have tried to do with this program and presentation, as Sandy mentioned, I've been interested lately in better understanding how entrepreneurs and managers more generally can make strategic decisions under uncertainty. And I have embarked in a program with quite a few colleagues that actually started from some basic ideas and some evidence collected from randomized control trials, but that actually has evolved into a larger program, given that we actually figured out that there was quite some demand also from the practice-oriented people and managers in particular, who are really interested in understanding these issues better. And what I'm going to talk to you today in particular is, as the title of the webinar says, this is really an attempt to understanding in details somewhat the foundations of what strategic decision making could look like, and particularly how you could use theories very much like we do in our research in order to make this decision. This particular paper I'm going to present is actually joint work with my colleague Arnaldo Camufo and with Andrea Pignataro, who is one of those managers and entrepreneurs, even though his company now is quite large and significant, who believes that this is actually an important avenue for better understanding for really practical reasons, not just theoretical reasons. I have decided to provide you with it's a small set of slides. It's 14 slides. Some of them are a little dense, but the plan here is really to leave enough room for questions and Q&A and maybe clarify things in the Q&A rather than in the presentation. The other bullet point I want to mention about this presentation is that what Andrea and Arnaldo and I have tried to do here, it's really to make this into a quote-unquote teachable structure. So we have tried to go to a level in which, rather than really speaking to the most theoretically inclined of us, we are really trying also to speak to managers and entrepreneurs to see whether the things that we are envisaging can resonate with what their decision making could actually be. There is a paper. We completed the paper yesterday, so I posted it on SSRN. I believe it's going to be available soon, but if you're interested we are quite open, and you can email me or download it from SSRN probably in a few days. So let me give you the background, and I like to give as a background this little story, which will be the examples that will accompany us throughout the presentation. We have quite a few other examples, but I thought that given the time of the presentation, I'll focus on one. I think this is also a very interesting example because this is a chef, JJ Mangano, from one of the most beautiful sites in Italy on the Gargano Peninsula, and I really encourage everyone to visit the Gargano Peninsula if you have a chance. It's really one of the most beautiful places of Italy, which is a quite beautiful country. So it's an advertising also for that area of the world. In that area of the world, there is a small town up on a hill called Monte Sant'Angelo. Monte Sant'Angelo is a holy site because it was one of the stages of the pilgrims who were moving from Santiago de Compostela to the Holy Land. And I mean, this was a walking travel which could easily take an entire life. Nearly midway was Monte Sant'Angelo, where they actually spent like 3 or 4 weeks or even a couple of months to rest. This was in the Middle Age, but you know, culture typically has long roots, and so this has been a religious site for many, many, many years, even today. Recently, the religiousness of the site has been revamped by the myth of a friar with stigmata. So basically, to make the long story short, this is a place visited by hundreds, thousands of devotees every year. So clearly, from an economic point of view, it made just sense to build the economy of this place on hospitality and restoration for this large-scale tourism. JJ came back, he was from Monte Sant'Angelo, but spent 20 years in Bologna. And he came back to Monte Sant'Angelo in the beginning of the 2000s, when he was around 40. And he had an unconventional idea. He said, rather than going with the stream and doing this classical restoration and hospitality service for religious people, I will set up a high-end cuisine restaurant. Literally, people thought he was crazy. No one gave him money to set up this restaurant, but he was quite stubborn, and he moved on. He had a very clear theory, and his very clear theory was, if I can induce a sense of scarcity, people like esoteric experience, and so I think I can raise demand for this place. It's only that people have to feel that this is not a place where they can just walk in, but it actually takes some time and some effort in order to get to the place. So basically, he tested his theory by systematically rejecting reservations, saying that he was fully booked, even though the restaurant was empty. And his theory of the experiment was, if the more I reject, the more calls I receive in the future, this is going to corroborate my theory that scarcity implies demand. If I get fewer and fewer calls, the theory is falsified and I will not open the restaurant. So as simple as that. So what are the lessons that we learn from this simple story? First, important strategic decisions are unique, uncertain, and with limited data. JJ did not have any past experience or data on high cuisine restaurants in Monte Sant'Angelo. Everything was up in his mind, mental representations of what the story could be. Second, decision makers under these conditions need to invent future states and their probabilities from theories. And they need to generate data that do not exist, calling for reservations, saying that you're fully booked, and recording the responses in order to test the theories. This is very different from collection of information. For example, he could have run surveys on whether customers would actually come to the restaurant. He was not seeking to collect information. He was seeking explanations. He was testing a theory, not just collecting information. Fourth, you learn by formulating multiple theories and testing the more uncertain theories, because the more uncertain theories are the theories that actually teach you more and from which you learn more. So what do we do in this paper and in this presentation? Well, what I do is I will provide a protocol for framing low frequency, high impact decisions. So we'll go step by step into things that, as I said, could actually be practically used as a framework to make these decisions. I will try to show how and why theories improve strategic problem definition and help to make better low frequency, high impact decisions, avoid the so-called type three errors. The model specification, making the error because you're working on the wrong model, and explain why this is an increasingly important source of performance, especially today. We are building this on the shoulders of giants. So I am just saying we are not, we are building on what quite a few people have done. This is just a limited list of the number of topics and people we actually learned from in order to develop this scheme that we would like to share. Let me go to the issue. Let me start with the classical decision problem, as we learned from decision scientists. So what decision scientists typically tell us is that you need to make a distinction between actions, which are the things that you can control, and states, which are the things that you do not control. And so, for example, in this very simple case, the action is, should I launch a new product or not? Or should I stay with my old product? And the states are whether people have high preferences for the new product or low preferences for the new product. This is the states whose realizations you do not know. And what you know is that if people have high preferences, you earn 100. If people have low preferences, you lose 20. Whereas if you go with the old product, essentially the preferences for the new product do not affect the payoffs. In this simple example, what we have is that two important assumptions. First, you know the states or their probabilities, but even if you do not know them exactly, you can predict them quite accurately from past information or data. If I am selling a product in Italy and I have to think about exporting it to France, I can make reasonable predictions on what the states and the probability of these states in France will be. Let me clarify this point because it's quite important. Knowing the states basically means that the decision maker knows that the only thing that it's payoff relevant, that makes a difference for your payoff, is whether customer preferences are high or low. Whether governments change in Italy, it's still something that is uncertain, but you know for sure that this is not going to affect the outcome of your product. And you also know that the same applies to France. Even if you can make an extrapolation from the Italian case and say, even if in France the government changes, it doesn't matter. So you know with certainty that the states are either high or low preferences. This is exactly the assumption that we violate systematically in strategy research, that actually strategic decision makers violate. Simply put, states and probabilities are unknown. And because states and probabilities are unknown, particularly for low frequency, high impact decisions, they need to generate them. And they need to generate them through mental representations. So the key issue here is not whether there is uncertainty on which state will be realizing. There is a more fundamental uncertainty, which is which are the states we should take into account. There are three concepts that we would like to highlight at the outset to clarify our story. And they are the concepts of attributes, causal links, and beliefs. This slide is a little dense, but let me go through it systematically because it gives you in a nutshell what is the story that we want to tell. And so the story is, let's consider the case in which, suppose that JJ is considering the standard problem, opening a hospitality restoration service for religious tourists. The first element of the decision is the choice of attributes. What are the attributes? Are elements of the decisions. So each attribute is an element of the decision that could take realizations of different kinds that you do not know exactly. you can think of them as answers to questions. So for example, in this case, JJ chooses 3 attributes. Religious, whether Monte Sant'Angelo will be attractive to devotees for quite some time in the future. It could be yes or no. Whether there will be tight or weak competition for his standard restoration service, and whether demand for his standard restoration will be sufficient S for making profits or insufficient for making profits. So basically, let me clarify one thing which is quite important. These are attributes that JJ has chosen to be the key elements of his theory. Anyone else could have chosen different attributes. The key difference compared to the France versus Italy export business is that in the problem of exporting to France from your knowledge of Italy, we would all agree that the key states are preferences of customers. Why? Because we have past data that tell us with high probability that these are the key states. This is a completely different problem. It's a problem on which we do not have information on to choose what the attributes and then the states will be. So we will have to conceive those states from our pseudo mental representations. And this implies that I can have a set of attributes, JJ could have a different set of attributes, Sandy could have a different set of attributes. This is completely subjective. Once you focus on a set of attributes, you set a focal attributes. Where is it that you want to get? In this particular case, the focal attribute is the demand for standard restoration, which could be sufficient or insufficient. Then you create a hierarchy of causal links and you set beliefs. If you look at the small networks to the left of the slides, so the religious attractiveness and competition are the antecedents to the demand for standard restoration. So what is JJ interested in? He is interested in the probability that demand for standard restoration is sufficient for profitability. So he is interested in the probability of S. But he knows that in this very simple problem, you can reach S in 4 different ways, through 4 different paths. And they are the path in which competition is tight and religious attractiveness will be high for quite some time. Competition is weak and religious attractiveness will be high for quite some time. Competition is tight and there will be no religious attractiveness. Competition is weak and there will be no religious attractiveness. These are 4 models that his simple causal structure has generated. In turn, these 4 models are made of conditional probabilities, which are the causal links. These are the probability of a sufficient profitability given tight competition and religious attractiveness for quite some time. Probability of sufficient demand for standard restoration with competition and religious attractiveness. Probability of S given tight competition and no attractiveness. Probability of S given weak competition and no attractiveness. Of course, these are multiplied by the unconditional probability of tight competition or attractiveness. Now, the conditional probability are the causal links. The unconditional probabilities are the beliefs. And we will point out in a second where do they come from. Now, each one of these 4 sequences will have a probability. So just to give you an example, we set as an example 0.2 and 0.5 here, because clearly he expects a higher probability of S if competition is weak than if competition is tight. And here we're basically saying, look, if religious attractiveness is going to disappear, then the probabilities of sufficiently high demand are going to be incredibly small, nearly 0. And he has beliefs on whether competition will be tight and on whether this will become religious attractive. So the bottom line is that each model is a probability. So it gives you a probability of a state. So 0.144 is the probability of the state S, T, and Y. 0.09 is the probability of the state S, W, and Y, and so on and so forth. The expected value of the theory is the sum of these probabilities. It's 0.234. And if you think about it, what is it? It's the probability of S. But we have decomposed this probability of S in the 4 paths that, given the theory, produces the probability of S. And we'll see in 1 second why this decomposition into the paths is actually relevant for understanding the decision-making process. Final point, where do the beliefs come from? 3 sources. They are first principles. You know that they are true because you know it. Second, so the really first principle in the Aristotelian sense. Second, there can be assumptions. You assume that they are true because in this way you want to understand what is the probability of S given the assumptions you are making. And 3, they could themselves be the end result of the structure, of a causal structure on top of them. But any causal structure you can think of will have at the top of the chain beliefs that people will think of in this way. So this is the expected value of the standard restoration theory. So what did Zenger do? He had a different intuition. And he said, let me develop a different theory. The different theory is a theory of high-end cuisine. So the previous theory was a theory about mass restoration. This theory is a theory about high-end cuisine. So he develops completely new attributes. And he says, for high-end cuisine, the attributes are different. The attributes are whether Monte Sant'Angelo could become a high-end touristically attractive place. Because you need people who were interested in premium cuisine as opposed to standard cuisine. Second, his scarcity attribute, which is what I was saying at the beginning. Do people feel a sense of scarcity, and does the sense of scarcity implies higher demand? And then there is the final focal attribute, which is demand for high cuisine. He goes exactly through the same process. He has a similar causal structure, and but now what is the difference? He has different causal links. For example, in this particular case, in the first one, it's what is the probability of high demand given high-end touristic attractiveness and given that scarcity actually creates this sense of esoteric experience that prompts people to go. And similarly to the other cases. Now, here, the expected value of the theory is again the sum of the 4 models, and it is higher. Clearly, this is a numerical example that I am using to make the case. But the more interesting question is, why is this higher? It is higher because the probability of high demand given scarcity is theorized to be much higher than the unconditional probability of high demand. So essentially, Zenger's intuition has been, I believe that this attribute that I have discovered makes a big difference. This is the big belief, the big jump that he is making into this. Before I go ahead and clarify where does this belief come from, let me tell you, for the most sophisticated econometricians of you, think of it in this way. What is this? These are the 4 parameters of a diff in diff. If you think of a diff in diff estimation, these are exactly the 4 parameters. It's the constant term, the treat, the post, and the treat times post. These are exactly those 4 parameters. So when you do a diff in diff and you conclude, I found an effect, what you are saying, what you are doing is exactly, you are estimating these 4 models. These are exactly the 4 models that you are estimating when you run a different if. And this is exactly what JJ, even though in a much less explicit and conscious way, has done. He has done exactly what we do when we run a different if. We have 4 models, we test the 4 models, we test the model, one of the 4 models, we'll see that in a second, and we come up with these parameters, which is exactly what JJ is doing. So, experiments. You do not test directly your theory. You only experiment models. Again, this is exactly what you do in a different if. What did JJ do? He got calls for reservation and he rejected them. He was in a place where high potential touristic attractiveness. So what he did, he basically tested the probability of H given Y and S. If he had also gone to another town to make this, he would also have tested the probability of H given N and S. But he only did the experiment in Monte Sant'Angelo. He could have run a different experiment, but he only ran that experiment. He ran that experiment, and what did he do? He tested the causal link that P of H given Y and S is equal to 0.5. Against what? Against the null hypothesis that that causal link is equal to 0. If he rejected H0, in case he rejected, in case he did not reject H0, suppose that people were not calling anymore. So once he says, I'm fully booked, then calls disappeared, vanished in the next couple of months. So in that case, he could not reject the null hypothesis. If he could not reject the null hypothesis, he would say, oh, my theory that P of H given Y and S equal to 0.5 is actually wrong. I have evidence that that probability is equal to 0. If that probability is equal to 0, it means that the state H, Y, and S is unlikely to occur as probability 0. Well, in this case, the value of my theory is 0.27 because the 0.1125 that he theorized, that he expected, is actually equal to 0. I want to clarify a very important point. JJ did not test an effect size. He was not looking for whether that probability is 0.5. He was testing a theory. He was testing the theory against the null hypothesis that that parameter is equal to 0. And this is very important because he was really, really a scientist. He was testing a theory, not just seeking data in order to have a better sense of what an effect size would be. Now, very important. The expected value of JJ's theory using my numbers is 0.3825. But there is a trick. This is the expected value of the theory, assuming that the theory is right. But we know that scientists and great entrepreneurs know that their theories may be wrong. So what is the real expected value of the theory? The real expected value of the theory is 0.3825 times the belief that the theory is right, plus U, which we'll clarify in a second, times the belief that the theory is wrong. Now, where do these beliefs come from? These are real beliefs on whether I think I got the right theory or not. If Sandy comes to me and she tells me, look, I have a completely different theory, then I might actually lower the probability that my theory is right. So that is, again, it's a belief on the fact that the theory based on those attributes, those causal links, and those beliefs is right. But the scientists or the entrepreneurs with the methodic doubt know that essentially that theory may not be right. So what is U, the alternative when the theory is wrong? U is not something you can quantify. It can only be a behavioral attitude towards a known. And because most of us, including me, are very concerned, if you find yourself in a dark room and you do not know what is happening in that dark room, I think you are not comfortable. So U, it's actually something small. So what do the decision makers with methodic doubt do? they know that the theories can be wrong, and therefore they discount the expected value of the theory that they find. Now, interestingly, what does the experiment do? What does the fact that people respond to the call for reservations or not imply for you? As I said, they clearly enable you to get information, evidence on whether the model is right or not. So you are testing whether that particular model produces a probability of 11.25% or 0, which is your null hypothesis. And we have already seen that the probability of that model influences the whole probability of the theory. So you are testing the expected value of the theory given that the theory is right. But in fact, suppose that people do not respond to the rejection of reservations. JJ could take two attitudes. One attitude could be, oh, my theory, the scarcity in my probability that scarcity implies demand, it's actually much weaker than I thought. But he could also think, and therefore the expected value of this theory is smaller than I thought. But he could also reason in a different way. Oh, my theory is wrong. I need to find a different theory. This is an open question. So the experiment could do both. It could either tell you, oh, my diff in diff does not work. Here is what the world looks like. Or it can also tell you, oh, my theory is wrong. I should run a different diff in diff. And in JJ's case, this is exactly the story. So if he did not get confirmation, corroboration of his theory, he might have said, okay, this is what a high-end cuisine would look like, not 38.25%, but only 27% probability. Or he could have said, oh, no, the theory is completely wrong. I need to think of a different way to predict the demand for high cuisine. Now, for as much this could sound esoteric to all of us, particularly thinking that managers or entrepreneurs or strategy decision makers think in this way, the point I want to say is the following. Milton Friedman, I think, once said, no one maximizes utility when they go to the supermarket, but they behave as if they are maximizing their utility. And now, let me suggest, I talked to JJ quite sometimes. He clearly did not go through these calculations, but he acted as if he had gone through these calculations. And with Arnaldo, we have talked to many entrepreneurs who think in this way. They do not make these calculations, but they act as if they are making these calculations. Some of them, it is very clear that they think exactly in this way. And what we hope to do is to take these best practices and see whether these best practices can be spread and taught to a larger number of potential executives and entrepreneurs. Let me just say, open space for open questions and conjectures. Here are three conjectures that we want to make. First, few important causal links are often more effective than many less important causal links. Think of it in this way. You run your regressions, you throw many independent variables, each of them has a small impact on the dependent variables, as opposed to running a significant treatment on a key variable that actually makes a difference. So parsimony is sometimes quite effective in strategic decision-making as well. Second, denser networks of causal links create more valuable theories. Suppose that JJ, and this is the example that you see in the slide, figured out a way with which scarcity could also attract more high-end tourists in Monte Sant'Angelo. Well, rather than just probability of Y in his four models, he would have the probability of Y given S, or the probability of N given S. And to the extent that S makes a difference for Y, so the probability of high-end touristic attractions increases because of scarcity, as opposed to non-high-end touristic attractions, this would raise the value of the theory. So a denser network of causal links creates more valuable theories. And finally, a longer chain of causal links is likely to produce more fundamental beliefs at the top. And the more fundamental beliefs at the top are more likely to be true because they're close to first principles. They are close to things that are objectively true. And so entrepreneurs who make long lists of causal links are more likely to have more valuable theories. So let me conclude and then really open the floor for questions, or I can give you more examples. I have many ways we can spend the next 20 minutes, but I'm happy I'm happier to address questions from people. So let me give you these 4 bullet points, which I think I would like them to be the takeaways that you can take from this presentation. First, exploration is the search for more likely states. Now, in a world in which states are unknown and in which you do not know the states, this is what raises the expected value of your theory. The search for states that your mental representation suggests could be more likely. Second, and this is, we think, a very important point, and this is something that we have discussed Andrea Pignataro has actually helped us a lot in this. I mean, I think that we learned a lot from him. But this is one of the things we really learned from him. You need to learn about the world first and then find the actions. The classical approach that we always have is I am a great producer of petrochemical products. And so I need to find a state in which this investment in petrochemical products, it's going to be most profitable. And if the states that we realize in which we sell petrochemical products implies that petrochemical products are not profitable, I have to give up. Well, the world we are describing is a different. And it's a world in which you say, oh, this is the state that is most likely to occur. Which action can I find in order to fit in that state? So this is a world in which resources are fungible, in which the key is not your specialization. The key is learning. It's learning about the world. Because by learning about the world, you can find the actions that fit the world better. Is it doable today? Well, yes, that's exactly what the digital transformation is doing. The digital transformation is creating the opportunity for moving resources in very fungible ways across things. To the extent that this becomes possible, the big implication of this is that learning about the world becomes the key element for strategic performance. But the entrepreneurs or decision makers that we are envisioning are not visionaries. These are not people who make up the world and go ahead with the world that they make up. These are entrepreneurs or decision makers who have visions, but also test them. And the test is what makes them realistic. It was what makes them concrete. Because yes, JJ had a vision, but he also tested it. And so by learning and developing and testing multiple theories, this is the way in which they learn about them. Final bullet point, in this world, what are the sources of better performance? First and foremost, wider domains. Because if you have wider domains, you learn about more attributes. If you learn about more attributes, you can make better choices of attributes. JJ could not have had the intuition about scarcity if he had not been in Bologna for 20 years working in luxury hotels. As a matter of fact, none of his colleagues in Monte Sant'Angelo who stayed in Monte Sant'Angelo with the narrow domains of Monte Sant'Angelo could figure out this opportunity. So wider domains is a key source of performance for strategic decision making. And the final bullet point is sources of better performance, more parsimonious, denser, and more basic theories. Okay, I will stop here. I can also stop sharing, And I'll be happy to get questions or provide with other examples, whatever, Sandy, you say, and we can.
Thank you, Alfonso. So we have a couple questions coming in, but I'll actually kick off with one of my own. So how should, kind of in this testing framework, think about the passage of time and how much testing is enough? So in this example where a call came in and he rejected a reservation, how many calls have to come in to be confident that this theory can be rejected and test something else?
This is a very good question, of course, and let me answer to this question to you in two different ways. One of the things that I learned when I was SMJ co-editor from Connie Elfert is when Connie told me something that it's actually, if you think about it, it's quite straightforward, but at the same time, it's one of the classical things that it's straightforward, but if someone did not see it, you could not see it as well. When we have p-values in our regressions, when do we stop thinking that we reject or not that hypothesis? Now, there is a convention, 5%, 1%, 10%, and we like to use those conventions. But if we are real scientists, we stop when our priors tell us, this is the p-value for rejecting that hypothesis. This is the p-value for not rejecting that hypothesis. I think what JJ did was exactly the same thing. He had a prior. So let me give you the answer in the following way. Suppose that he was sitting next to someone who would tell him, oh, this is a crazy idea, it's a lousy idea, I think you are going to destroy everything. I think he would need more rejections, more people calling back per given rejections in order to be sure. Suppose that he was sitting next to someone who was telling him, JJ, this is a great idea, I think you're absolutely right. He would probably need fewer calls back in order to make the rejection. So I think the answer to your question, where do we stop? Where our priors tell us where to stop. And where do our priors come from? They could be first principles, they could be assumptions. You may want to have additional analysis in order to understand where those priors are.
Great. Thank you. All right, we have a question from Chen Wei, so we will unmute and then you can ask your question directly.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sandy, and thanks a lot, Alfonso, for this insightful presentation. I'm just curious, how does that framework connect to like your other work with Tepo and Zenger as well, like a value lab? What is the value of being a contrarian, or how that can be computed? Because if a theory that is easy to be imagined or be verified, should that not be discounted given the competition? So that's just my question about the value of being a contrarian.
This is a great question. So let me try to address this question in two ways. First and foremost, how does it resonate to what Teppo and Todd and I and other people have done on this? Well, it resonates very closely, because the point we are trying to make here is that thinking in a contrarian way will provide you not with solutions, but with opportunities for solutions that you can test. And this is very important. The emphasis on being a contrarian, it's basically the emphasis on you have an established theory, you are quite confident about that theory. You should ask yourself, is there any alternative theory I can pursue in order to change the course of events? But of course, not only you have to formulate that theory, but you also have to test it. So it resonates perfectly with that. To go to the second part of your question, and which is basically, now that we have this theory, this contrarian theory, essentially, why isn't this already taken up by competition? Well, I have an economics background. I have a PhD in economics, and this is a great opportunity for me to suggest why, in spite of the fact that I learned a lot from my PhD in economics, there is something that I have learned from strategy. And it's the usual story that it is not true that it is impossible to find $100 on the street because someone else has already picked out. What strategy taught me is that indeed, it is quite possible, because it is quite possible that you are the only one who sees the $100. And Schumpeter said that. He said, there are people who see things that other people don't see. And what we see every day is exactly this. So JJ saw things that his colleagues in Monte Sant'Angelo did not see. Now, to go a little deeper into your question, where does this ability come from? And we could easily give the cheap shot and say, oh, people are more intelligent than others. I don't think this is the case. I think that, and this is a test that we could assess with some theories, I think the most important determinant, the most important factor that would explain this variable is wider domains. People with wider domains see more things. And because they see more things with wider domains, they see things that other people do not see. So I think perfectly resonate with the contrarian story. We have many examples in which the major entrepreneurs, great entrepreneurs, have been great entrepreneurs because they have seen contrarian situation and tested them. And second, is this going to be washed away by competition? The answer is no, because our ability to establish wider domain, it's incredibly heterogeneous. So if I have one implication out of this, learn and get wider domains.
Thank you.
If there are other questions, feel free to submit them in the chat. We will feel free to call on you and invite you to ask your question directly.
So I actually want to follow up on this wider domain idea and implications. I mean, it seems to imply that maybe diverse teams, or having diverse teams and coming up with the hypotheses together might be kind of a very actionable thing for founders to do rather than kind of testing in isolation. So I wonder if that's something that you've seen with the teams that you met with, or kind of during this formulation process.
What we have seen is actually this: any factor that expands the domains of people helps. So diversity of teams, absolutely. So people who have more diverse backgrounds actually can help. The other thing that we've actually seen is essentially, let me make it in a slightly more theoretical way, but it then go. Essentially, what wider domains do for you is twofold. On the one hand, they show you attributes that you did not think of. And this can help because you have better choices. But they also show causal links that you did not figure out before. And if you go to a more practical story, and I can give a couple of additional examples. For example, some of Luxottica, which is today famous worldwide company, was one of the first companies in the world to figure out in the 1970s that glasses could also be used not just as to correct high side effects, but also as fashionable. And this came from the founder, Del Vecchio's wider domain in assessing a number of potential opportunities in the high fashion business near Milan and so on and so forth. So most likely, this could only happen in a country like Italy because of all this fashion kind of relationship that he could see. And we have quite a few other examples in which heterogeneity of exposures to heterogeneous domains, it's actually giving you this widest domain that you can process in this way. But remember that this is only a necessary condition. The sufficient condition goes back to what Cheng was saying earlier. The sufficient conditions that you have to have a contrarian way of thinking. You have to see the fashionable glasses, and you have to have the courage to say, to have the ability to develop a theory, and the courage to say, okay, let me test that. It's an unconventional story. It goes against the wisdom of the crowd. Let me try that and let me see what I can do. So these are all necessary conditions altogether. If you don't have a wide domain, you are unlikely to have to be able to see contrarian opportunities. If you see contrarian opportunities but the small domains, you are unlikely to see values for that. But yes, the two things are complementary assets for the process.
Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, so I think maybe with that, we can wrap up our session today. And thank you so much, Alfonso, for a very insightful seminar. I think you've given us a lot to think about. And also, I think many of us work with entrepreneurs. So this is a very good model, I think, to pass forward. Thank all of you in the audience for joining us today. And we hope to see you at our next seminar.
Thank you very, very much. And as I said, if you're interested in the research, just get in touch with us. I'll be happy to share the paper. I'm happy to get feedback and continue this conversation. Thank you.